Welcome to today's episode of The Square. I am really excited to be here with Varun Kohli, our Director of Sustainability. Thanks so much for being here, Varun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming down from New York, where I know fall's in full swing, whereas in Texas, it's just late summer, and it's still really hot outside.
Yeah, I tried walking over from my hotel, and my jacket didn't last a block.
So, we definitely want to talk a little bit about some of your role as Director of Sustainability and some of the different things that you've done in your career. But I love to start with a little bit of your why. So, tell me a little bit of a story about the moment you knew you wanted to be an architect or a designer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to, as a child, I grew up part of my childhood in Nepal, Kathmandu. And once in a while, I would travel to New Delhi, which was the big city, with my father. And I was always intrigued by these tall towers. There were very few, and they were quite intriguing to me. So I always thought about, doing something with buildings.
Yeah.
And in some of my early conversations with my father, I found out that he wanted to be an architect but couldn't afford to go to college.
Really?
So that kind of brought me even closer. I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then things kind of just converged, and just being interested in art and science has kind of brought it together into architecture. It just made sense.
Were you constantly drawing as a kid, or was it something that really kind of clicked a little bit later?
No, I was always drawing and sketching and painting when I was a kid. It's funny that, since I went to architecture school, apart from maybe the first couple of years, I stopped drawing and painting as an art and just kind of took on drafting.
Yeah.
Which I miss sometimes.
Yeah. I don't know if it's anything like my kids. I really probably should hold on to some of their drawings, but there's so many of them, they're just immediately going to the trash bin.
You should do what I do. I scan them.
Oh, that's a great idea. So we've got digital copies of them.
Digital copies of everything. Well, the good ones.
So you have kids?
Yes.
How many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids. One is 15 in high school. He's a surfer dude, and an 80-year-old who is going on 21. She's a handful.
So are either of them following in their the father's footsteps?
No. My son wanted to be an architect until he was 5 years old, and then I remember him coming to me and saying, "Nah, you work too much. I want to be like mommy, like a banker. I don't want to work so much."
That's great. Oh, awesome. So then you had this passion for design. Where did you end up going to school?
Ended up going to school in New York, City College of New York. That was my undergrad. And then I worked for about 6 years in New York before I moved to London for a couple of years and do my grad school.
Okay.
That was my focus on sustainability. And, even in undergrad, my professors used to tell me it's not just the school, right? For studying architecture, it's the city that teaches you. And what better city to be in than New York and London? So those were my schools, really.
Wow. So then let's talk about a little bit about sustainability, because, it's certainly now it's something that's a lot more having a much bigger impact on the world of architecture. But I imagine early on it wasn't something that was front of mind for people.
No. And it's quite interesting how it came about because, I went to undergrad in mid-90s, right? And I was in school, I remember, in my third-year studio, and we were asked to design a courthouse building. And while I was designing it, everybody was kind of looking at the poetic meaning of a courthouse or justice and, responding to that in a poetic way. I was thinking more about, well, what do people feel when they come into the building, right? And most people, other than lawyers, probably don't want to be there. So how do you make them feel better, right? And so I started twisting and tuning my form, building our form, to allow for more natural light, allow for more ventilation. And when I presented that back to my professor, he said, "Oh, it looks like you're interested in green architecture," and I had no clue what green
I like all the colors of the rainbow.
Okay.
Why does it have to be just green?
It doesn't look green to me, but okay, if you say so. But that's where I started realizing that was my interest, and so that kind of carried through. And when I picked what I wanted to study for grad school, it was sustainability.
Was there somebody either at present where you were going to school or potentially in the past that stood out to you as somebody that influenced the idea of sustainability for you?
I don't think there was any one particular architect or, there were so many that, that toyed with the idea of sustainability a lot of times, kind of literally sprinkling green onto the buildings. In some ways, that's great, but I think one of the architects that really stood out to me and not really known for sustainability is Gordon Bunshaft of SOM. His tower in Jeddah, that was the headquarters for their national bank. If you look at the plan, it's a triangular building. And what I really loved about it was Gordon Bunshaft was able to take a building typology, which is very common in the Western world, right? Mm-hmm. And usually people would just pick it up and plop it into any other part of the world.
Sure.
He didn't do that. He took that and he rethought about that building in the environmental and social context of Saudi Arabia. So if you look at that building, it's pretty blank on the outside, and then it opens up into courtyards on the inside, keeping the sun out.
Yeah.
So just being cognizant and understanding of how architecture should respond in its context is so important. And so for that reason, that Gordon Bunshaft really stands out to me.
Speaking of SOM, you have had the opportunity to work at a handful of pretty high-end firms.
Yeah.
Obviously, Corgan top amongst them. But what do you think are the key characteristics of being able to have the leadership of being a larger firm? Somebody that's a thought leader, and how to, for lack of a better term, use that power for good.
Yeah. No, I think one of the things that I learned with the leaders in these leading firms is you have to always be questioning and pushing the boundaries, right? It's yes, we're designing as good as we can right now, but there's always room for improvement. There's always conversations to be had with the clients, right? Like sustainability, for example. I started doing this 15 years ago at SOM in the New York office, and I was one of maybe 2 people who were doing it. And initially, it was kind of something that SOM wanted to do. We put this in front of our clients. Wasn't always appreciated. Like wasn't always like the top of priority list for them. But I found over time, in a matter of like couple of years, what I ended up doing was I started putting a book together that showed not only what we were doing sustainability-wise, but starting to show how those spaces would be better than the building next door, right? And I remember at the end of one project, like towards the end of DD phase, the client said, "Can you give me that book?" And I'm like, "Sure. What are you going to do with it now?" And he's like, "Well, this is my second marketing book because I go around to my tenants and show them how my space will have better daylighting, have better ventilation, or whatever that strategies we provide." So it became an add-on, a value add, right, to the projects rather than just saying, "Okay, we are meeting the lead requirements."
I imagine that's been kind of an uphill battle for the industry or the sub-industry of sustainability, is being able to show, value to people that are typically very kind of black and white ROI numbers driven.
Yeah.
How have you been successful in that?
Well, marketing is one of them. And the other is one thing I've learned over the past 15 years is don't fight it. You work with the clients. The first thing I really try to do is to understand what is the value that the client is looking for, right? Really understand their business. What are they trying to do? How are they going to make money? And then you find angles to get into that and say, okay, this is why what I do will support what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a lot easier trying to sell sustainability. Sometimes I don't even want to use the word sustainability, right? We'll give you a product that is better performing than the next one.
Yeah.
And that's all.
And by the way, it's good for the planet and everything else. Planet,
exactly. And good for your bottom line.
Yeah.
So that's an approach that usually works.
You've also had the opportunity of teaching at Harvard. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that kind of came out of the blue. I had just started my practice after leaving SOM, and I was very idealistic. And my thought was, I'm going to run my practice based on a sustainable integration into architecture. There's no 2 separate things. Anyway, that's a side story. While I was doing that, I started, and 3 months down the road, somebody reached out to me from Harvard. Somebody else had recommended me, and I ended up teaching a year of seminar course focused on environmentally responsive building skins. And I was told many times that's a very long title. But it was a seminar course where, I asked students to look at ways of improving the building facade in a parametric way,
Yeah.
while applying some of these analysis works.
So, I know that it's been true in my life is one of the best ways to learn is to teach. Was there something, even though you were teaching, that you learned out of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of an eye-opener because you started realizing that, at least for me, that a lot of these students, they're super intelligent and smart, right? And they're running a lot of these even in those, this was back in 2011, I think, and they were running all these parametric computational tools. And when I started giving them tasks to say, now link your parametric, parameters to results that have to do with daylighting or solar radiation or anything else you want to pick. A couple of students came back to me and said, we were doing all this parametric stuff with no rhyme or reason. Now we have a reason.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was interesting to find that there was this kind of a linkage that people had not, or at least the students had not discovered yet.
When you think back about the time you were working for the other firms, you had your own firm, is there a project that stands out to you as something either that was special to you or just you're really proud of?
Well, one of the projects that I took on as my own practice, I think we grew up to about 5 or 6 people. And I was doing a project in Bangalore that was almost 1 million square feet of core and shell.
Wow.
And
It's a huge project.
It's a huge project. And, trying to fuse this notion of like environmental sustainability. And it came through. I lost my shirt on it, but we made the project happen. It was built, and really, even years after I completed the project, I go back to Bangalore, and the clients tell me that when the real estate broker came up, trying to lease the space, they looked at the building, and it wasn't enough windows, and he said, "This is not going to sell. There's no light, and there's probably no light inside." And then when they walked in, they were so pleasantly surprised that there was natural light and all all of those things. And the last I heard from that developer was that there's 2 towers, and in between, you're kind of facing the west side, and the building has these kind of curved out shapes. And he said, looking west is the most Instagrammed photo in Bangalore right now.
So
I'm particularly proud of that.
So speaking of the business that you started, Merge, tell me a little bit about what it's like to have your own practice versus being a part of a larger practice.
Yeah. Well, it's not a cup of tea for everyone. I have to say that. I did it because I wanted to kind of pursue this process of design that I truly believed in. But I quickly found out, 3 years down the road, until about 3 years, I was doing smaller projects, and it was great. And it's one person in my office. When it became 5 or 6 person practice, and you're dealing with these projects, I found myself spending 70-80% of my time just chasing work or chasing invoices and a lot of admin work, and quickly realized I didn't want to deal with these sleepless nights. And I decided to move back to a large firm. So I joined HOK, and
it was. I think we did a Square episode with Matt Mooney, and one of the quotes he said kind of stands out because we were talking about the leadership really in any firm of any size, and that is, he said, you almost always have to put aside your first passion for the greater good of the firm. And I think that's a great example of that. It's something where you have a bigger end goal. You're creating more projects that have this sustainability element in them, but you're having to put away your first love of being able to be the one to design it.
It's also, I think you almost, in my mind, you're almost multiplying your efforts, right? When you're trying to do this on your own or with one other partner, it's very difficult. But when you're trying to do, and it also depends on what you want to do.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do small projects. I wanted to be engaged with the larger projects. And to be able to do that, it's much easier, it's more fruitful, I would say, when you're working with 10 other partners.
Yeah. Even with the diversity that you have throughout your career, is there anything you wish you'd done differently?
Honestly, no. And I say that only because not so much that, there's obviously a number of times in your life you think about something we should have done differently.
Sure.
But when I look back at my path in my career, I think everyone has their own paths, and mine's unique to my journey. And I don't think I want to change anything. I think I did fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay. I'm happy to be here at Corgan.
Yeah.
I'm happy where I ended up. So
What you mean by that is you're happy to be here at this table with me.
Exactly.
Because everything
There you
led
go.
to here. Was there a setback or rejection that you felt helped shape that and kind of give you the resolve or the direction to pursue a better course?
I wouldn't say it was a rejection, but I did feel, when you come out of college, I remember graduating from City College of New York, and I realized that in a place like New York, where there's some very amazing firms, it was really difficult to get even a foot in the door with a degree from a college that was not an Ivy League school.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so I think it wasn't a regret as much as saying, okay, we need to do something about that. And so I ended up going to the AA, which is a pretty well-known school.
Yeah.
As soon as I got back, it didn't take me a few months before I was in SOM.
Which is, that whole thing is ironic considering you ended up teaching at Harvard years
exactly.
later.
And it's a bit unfortunate too, right? Because we do judge students coming out of which school, which is not necessarily true all the time. So we have to be more wider in our perspective and open-minded. Yeah.
All right. Tell me something that you love to do that has nothing to do with architecture.
I love to be hiking. I love the mountains. I mentioned I grew up in Nepal.
Yeah.
I do less now than I should. But back in the day, like 2001, my best trip ever was trekking up to Mount Everest Base Camp.
Oh, wow.
We actually climbed higher than Mount Everest Base Camp. So we were about almost 20,000 feet. Looking across the base camp onto Mount Everest, and that was about a 15-day trek with no showers. But it was an amazing trip. So I still love doing that.
Yeah.
I wish I could get out and do more.
Yeah, that's wow. I can't imagine being able to just be right there and be able to see Mount Everest.
It's amazing.
Right there in
It's
front of you.
quite a trip.
Is there, certainly part of the creative process is sometimes great when you have that inspiration level, but there's a certain part of it that you just feel dry and kind of drained, and that's when a lot of times those things that you do outside of architecture can help. But are there things that you do to keep yourself inspired?
I mean, the one thing that I've always enjoyed, and again, that's something I would want to go back to, is teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I'm not teaching, I do go for jury reviews. A friend of mine teaches at Princeton, and I get invited every year for a final jury review on a sustainable course that he teaches. And just, even not even teaching, but being there for a final review and looking at all these ideas that, students come up with, I think it's a really nice kind of a break between your mundane tasks that you have to do. And I still think that in our jobs, even if we can get about 40% or 50% of what we really enjoy and the rest is mundane, that's still a success.
Yeah.
Right? Because
that's a win.
A lot of people don't get that either.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Overall, who do you think have been the strongest influences in your life?
I would have to say my parents. There was a point in my youth when I was in New York. I was about to quit college because I had a job and I was just going to make money. And they always told me that education is something you have to accomplish.
Yeah.
And it kind of pushed me to stay in school while I was working and finish that. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I might have been selling airline tickets.
What excites you about the future of architecture? And it's almost required you put a shameless plug in here for Ekko.
Well, I'm glad. I think this is almost like a perfect storm, the moment that we're in, right? And Ekko is like the perfect time to kind of to take birth in a way, right? And I say that because having been doing this for about 15 years, doesn't sound like a long time, but it is. This is the first time I feel that the wind is on our back when it comes to designing correctly, when it comes to environmental sustainability, social sustainability. And it's being driven from sort of the grassroots, right? Like when I speak to clients now, they're almost being pushed by investors, by their end users, by their clients, which is great. Like it's no longer us going out and trying to push sustainability because it's better for the planet. It is part of the business now.
Yeah.
Almost every client will have an ESG goal. Every investor that's putting in money is asking for their ESG targets, and they're establishing those targets.
Yeah.
So not only can we help them design better buildings, we can, as Ekko, what I would love to do is to help them outside of the architecture world and say, how do you build your portfolio to get to net zero,
Yeah.
to get to your targets?
Give me just for people that may not know what Ekko is, give me the 30-second pitch version of what Ekko is.
So Ekko is the formulation of the efforts around sustainability that Corgan always had, right? So when I joined, I've looked at projects, and there's plenty of projects that are great examples of sustainability. What Ekko is, what it's doing is it's bringing that expertise into one group.
It's kind of
formalizing it and taking it to the next level. And so my task now is to build a core group of expertise that can push these projects even further, most of our projects, if not all, and at the same time build this sort of almost an expert, if you may, that begins to provide even independent consulting to our clients.
Okay, I won't tell anyone, but do you have kind of a holy grail project out there that you would just love to do?
Well, in fact, I am doing one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
This is one that I am most proud. I should have said this project was my most proud moment. In my thesis at grad school, I had designed a school building in rural India. Now that was theoretical, right? But 4 years ago, a friend of mine, a childhood friend, called me out of the blue and said, I have a foundation and we need to build a school in this remote part of India. Can you help me? And so that's been my pro bono weekend project for the last 4 years. Now I sit on the board of this foundation, Pokrama Foundation.
Wow.
And we've been designing this, and it's almost complete, and it's completely passive. All we're doing now is looking for funds to put solar panels on the roof, and we'll be completely net zero.
Wow.
So that's been a dream project come true, and I'm just waiting for it to complete.
It's going to be an incredible moment when you get to go and visit and it's done. And
And the best part is, Brandon, it's not the building anymore, right? Yeah. When now sitting on the board, we hear stories about kids, about girls who never had education opportunities, now having that. Simple things like them being given bicycles to right along, and the confidence that builds in these young children.
Yeah.
That's like the architecture is kind of
that's it,
out of the picture.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end it. Thank you so much for being here, Varun.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about Corgan Ekko or reach out to Varun, we'll have the information in the description below. And make sure to check out our next episode.